Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery.
I do have quite a few, unfortunately, but I've been trying to. Well, never mind. Never mind. It's also fun to discuss one's hideous addictions.
Well, they could be worse addictions.
And that's, Colleen and I often, we've talked about how she loves coffee. I like Diet Dr. Pepper. Like, any day with those things in it is a good day, and they're relatively inexpensive, relatively harmless. Caffeine is an accepted stimulant compared to, Dexedrine or whatever else it might be. And so it's kind of fun to be in a world where every day we get this big smile from the first sip of each of our beverages. And I don't know, as you know, I sip all day. I probably go through a 2-liter bottle a day, always much iced. And so I really like it cold, and I like it kind of diluted, I guess. But that's what they want you to do is, drink 8 glasses of water a day. Right. And between all my ice cubes, I think I don't have to even drink water by itself. It's kind of funny.
Ice cubes, that's great.
Yeah. Only occasionally do I get the caffeine dry mouth or something like that. It's kind of weird when I'm probably at this point, we've talked about this before, I've been where I went on a hiking vacation, and I'm like, after the first 2 hours, I got a headache. It's like, this isn't that strenuous. Oh, it's because I didn't start off my day, with the first caffeine. And so it's the caffeine withdrawal, and it's a little bit of dehydration. And so I've learned to, when I take water along, sometimes I'll put a little bit of Gatorade powder in there to replace the electrolytes or whatever they say it does. Right. I don't think it really does do that, but it just is, you don't realize how addicted you are to something until you go cold turkey, and then you're like, oh man.
And a lot of things I drink, especially pop, I like cold, like you.
Yeah.
Like beer, I cannot drink a warm beer. If I don't finish it quickly and it warms up, it's just toss it. And I'm finding with the diet pops, I always like Coke, but I have to have it really cold. I can't stand a warm Coke. And I'm finding with the diet pops, especially like the diet A&W and the diet Vernors, which I discovered, if they are warm, the taste is just not that great. But if they're really cold, it brings out the Vernors flavor or the A&W flavor. And
I really agree with that. Way long ago, we used to go to Great America. I lived in Chicago, as you know, for the first big part of my life. And Great America, which is now Six Flags Over America. But back then, they had all the usual rides, roller coasters, and so forth. One of the coolest attractions was, you always go during the summer, they had a place where you get a frosty mug full of root beer for a nickel. And I think it might have gone to a quarter over the course of time, but still, compared to $1.79 or whatever else. And it just, was there anything more refreshing? Here's the frosty mug. They kept, they had the big freezer, the froster, where you keep all these mugs, and they knew how to just tap it so it had the perfect head of foam on it and stuff. And man, even if you went on a water ride, you didn't get as refreshed and cooled off as this perfect mug of root beer. Right. I've always liked things that were like that, root beer and Dr. Pepper, where they have a little something going on, birch beer or sarsaparilla or something where there's a little, I don't know, a zing to it, a ginger taste or whatever else it might be. And Coca-Cola and Pepsi and all those things are good, but they all taste very generically the same to me. Whereas like root beer, a good root beer is really, man, this is great.
Hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the cost, because remember when we were young at Burger King or whatever, you'd order your pop. It was $1.50 or whatever it was.
Right.
And if you wanted another one, you'd have to go and get another one because it was behind the counter. And then somebody discovered, wait a second, if we put that out for them to refill as much as they want, we'll sell just as much. And then
take the time off of our people's hands.
Yeah. And talk about feeding the addiction. People are so, I can get this 5-gallon thing and I can drink as much as I want. Let's put some chemicals in there so they want even more. I
remember there being uh, I lived in Hoffman Estates, northwest of the city, and there was a Chili's there, which, no lie, the reason that I liked going there was not only because the food was okay. I liked, my chimichanga plate or whatever. It's because they were one of the first restaurants, not even a fast food place, to have refills. And I just was like, this is like a total
Right.
breakthrough in terms of my enjoyment. We were in, let's see, Vail or Aspen, Colorado, and we went to a restaurant that also had a bar. And I didn't realize that meant they charged you for every single drink. And so I had my usual, no lie, like 4, 5, 6, because we've been hiking and I was, dehydrated. And then I got, like, my food was $20 and my drinks were $20.
Right.
What the fuck? And I could not convince the owner, like, when I said I'd like a refill, the guy didn't say, there's no refills here,
Full
right?
price.
Look at the bar. It's a different thing because now it's such an expected thing,
Right.
such a standard thing. But I guess, again, the reason saying it was either Vail or Aspen was because, well, that's where the rich folks go. And they don't care about, a $2 soda pop times 6 or whatever else it might be, a $3 thing. Well, it was really like, you kind of, not bait and switched me, but you didn't give me full information. I would have switched to water. I would have drank less if it wasn't the usual thing here compared to everywhere else. So that's kind of funny. I should remember the name of the restaurant so I can defame them. But it was something generically Italian, like Angelotti's or something like that.
Right.
Sorry, there's a really an Angelotti's. Don't mean to defame you, but it was this and you know what? I don't mean to, like, as if I still have a grudge. I just know that whenever we go back there, I'm the memory that I have of there was we went to a cool jewelry store. We were shopping around and acting as if we were posh. And in the jewelry store doorway, there was a huge Newfoundland, a wonderful big dog.
Love
and Colleen really is not that happy with dogs. And so I always interpolate myself in between her and the animal. Well, when I stepped closer to this dog, he like totally bumped up against me and was loving my attention, getting scritches and all that kind of stuff. And then we shopped. When I went to leave, he like stood in front of me on the way out because he wanted some more love.
Yeah.
So that's my fond memory. And that's usually, I think, how memory works is you don't remember unless it's traumatically painful. My memories of Aspen were, wow, they have a beautiful fountain and they beautiful views everywhere you went and that little zing of what the hell on drinks, but then here's the Newfie and he made up for it. So it just was, how it's funny how your memory works, that it really is, I guess it's not the nice median line, it's the peaks and valleys that you remember because they're different, they're extraordinary, that kind of thing. So,
well, segue here. Speaking of memories and drinking pop and cold pops, we have a holiday coming up this weekend, one that signals the start of summer, and everybody usually has big plans and stuff. Though that's curtailed a lot. Last year there was like nothing. So, what are you guys doing different this year?
So it's fun. One of the things we're doing different is we're actually kind of coming out of our COVID cocoon. Colleen has family members that everybody's been vaccinated, and up until now, like when we go for our walks in the evenings, we've gone unmasked, but it's because you're in the open air and you're still able to avoid being in a confined space. Well, we're actually going over to one of the sisters and we're going to play games and have a cookout and stuff like that. And so that's, if you will, not that much different in terms of it's very traditional to have the cookout and all that kind of stuff. Right. But to just return to it after having not had it for a year, it'll be a delight.
Memorial Day, the return.
Yeah. The return, exactly. But also, we even though driving is a little weird on Memorial Day sometimes because you'll see all the statistics that say this many traffic deaths, and so we're trying not to do that. But we really like the combination of going someplace for a hike and a cool attraction. And so we're going to go to Jamestown, New York, which is where the National Comedy Center is. It's the birthplace of Lucille Ball, and so there already was a Lucy and Desi museum there.
70 years this year.
Isn't that cool? You know what I mean? That's their... the fact that she had such an incredible impact, both as a performer and a producer, like she, Star Trek exists because of Lucille Ball.
Yes.
I think I was going to say to bring it the whole nerd connection and stuff like that, you know what I mean? The geekery. But this place is very cool in terms of it's got all kinds of the history of comedy, like starting with, I don't know, the first Roman pun and then burlesque and whatever else it might be. But it's got a really just an amazing variety of, here's a clip and you can actually listen to Mort Saul or Lenny Bruce from way back when. Then you can listen to Saturday Night Live, and you can listen to, as you go forward through, and the whole main floor is just loaded with cool stuff like that. And then downstairs, that's what they call the blue room, where it's like, for this, the upstairs is for the kids and downstairs is for things of a more adult nature. And it isn't that you go downstairs and immediately hear, MFMF, but it just is. There's been a lot of, some part of what makes humor transgressive is when you talk about adult topics. So it's sex and vulgarity and whatever else it might be. And, that's when you there's the capturing of the United States and maybe the world's history is so often with the humorists that talked about it at the time. And so when you see Red Fox, not as like Sanford and Son kind of a TV character, but how incredibly funny he was as a what they used to call party records. You know what I mean? They were very blue, but they were very much about human foibles. You know what I mean? This is what the kind of stupid things guys will do to maybe get together with the ladies, and then there'll be women. Larry Miller has a great thing where you can set up the most ridiculous and probable scenario, but if you end it with, and then you'll meet women and be like, I'm in. I'm going to go in that submarine and I'm going to take that mountain and I'm going to.
I guess adding that to the end of the sentence is a little better than the without pants.
Right, exactly that, between the sheets, that kind of stuff. Right. Exactly. So we've been there before and we liked it. And it's one of those things where even if you've done it one time before, there's such a wealth of stuff there. And I think that they change the exhibits out often enough that it's going to be worth just kind of re-immersing ourselves. And of course, they have the coolest gift shop in the world. So you can get a rubber chicken. We have a rubber chicken ornament for our tree because we got it at the National Comedy Center. And they have all kinds of T-shirts. And anyway, I don't know. Live comedy is our favorite night out. There's so much good for you about a good belly laugh, the relief of tension. That, you know what I mean? It just does wonders for your health and for your immune system. But it's not about the practicalities of it. It's because I love to laugh. I love to have someone that can surprise me and be witty and comment on the events of the day in a way that nobody else does. Each comedian has their comedic voice, and the persona they put out, or just the fact that they get to these very funny things so quickly after an event, or how they handle hecklers or whatever. They're some of my favorite company. I've always been where I hung out a little bit after the show if you have an opportunity to meet your rock and roll idols, but there's something very cool about meeting your comedy people because it's like their superpowers that they can make you feel happy. And not everybody is equally approachable. Some people are very funny, but not necessarily charismatic, if you know what I'm saying. But when you become friends with a comedian, it's just like, man, he didn't mind my company. I made the team. You know what I mean?
Even better is if you're just sitting around talking and you make the comedian laugh. That feeling of...
Absolutely. In fact, we had this happen one time that there was, they usually have like 3 comedians at least. There's the showrunner, if you will, and then there's the feature act and there's the main act. And we were having such fun because we knew the feature act, he was a more frequent Cleveland guy, that we were like laughing our butts off, just talking and like that. We could each make each other laugh. The main guy came over to talk to us because we were having such a good time. He's like, I want in on the fun. And it's like, I don't know. I love what you just said, that I'm not only, in comedy clubs, but on Facebook, friends with various different people. And I often am very flattering, and more like complimentary to them because I really admire a sense of humor. There's such intelligence and creativity and stuff that goes into it. And the fact that now we have exchanges instead of my just, being the fawning fan, but we actually I don't give material. I don't write jokes for them, but what I say, they will often laugh at or comment on. It's like, well, if I can make a funny guy laugh, that's a cool thing. You know what I mean? That my vision, people have told me that I'd be okay as a stand-up comedian because I'm relatively quick in that way. But I always had that weird vision of standing up in front of a room full of people and it not being for free with your Mensa friends, but people who paid to be in there and they're arms crossed going, make me laugh, you bastard. And I don't know, that doesn't seem as much fun as
it's work then.
It's work. And another thing is, I hope you don't mind me going on about this, I really am better about improv. And every time I give one of my talks, for instance, I run off of an outline, but every single talk is different.
A little bit
talk
here and
about
there.
Things in a different way, different vocabulary. I digress in different ways, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think I would have been a very good actor because memorizing somebody else's words and just repeating them, and maybe repeating them with different emotions welling in me, and direction from the director saying, well, here now you should be be more
Right.
aggressive or whatever. And I feel so puppety doing that kind of stuff instead of, it's me, this is me saying these things. And
Right.
whatever part of me that people like or don't like, it's at least me instead of I faked it. I really don't
Right.
like
Right.
doing the fake thing, so that's the biggest reason when people talk about on the comedy circuit, as they work their way up, they have that perfect 10 minutes and they have the tight 20, and they work their material, and they're very writerly sometimes, but you go to 50 different cities, and you know what? You're saying that at least 50 times,
Yeah.
and
And,
maybe multiple shows per city. So you're saying it 200 times. And that's kind of hellish to me. I don't
yeah.
want to recite. I want to goof. You know what I mean? So,
How many times do you hear about, oh, I love this thing. It's my passion. I want to do it for my whole life. And then it becomes a job, and
yeah,
you lose
yeah,
some of that. And, you
exactly.
mentioned about the improv and these comedians, talking stuff. I wonder if that ability some comedians have to, hear a headline and just riff on it with some comedy, or, this just happened a couple hours ago.
Yes,
Let me give you my comedy routine on it now. I wonder
yes.
if that's the same part of their brain that rappers who can be on the street corner and do the rap battles just off the top of their heads, be able to get the words.
Honestly, I think it must be related. There's a muscle that you flex when
Yeah.
you're like, how to look at things, how to think of. Sometimes you have, like, I don't know, when I've done improv, there's been occasional times where I have a good line that I like to use, but it applies in multiple situations, and I don't feel like I'm parroting myself. It's more like when you have 1,000 good lines to choose from, and this is the one where it'll be really zingy, perfect, applicable to this situation. That's what I think about people that, when you're reading the headlines, you're almost like, I'm always going to have police corruption material ready. I'm always going to have, government ineptitude material ready. And again, the foibles of men and women and how they chase each other. So you can have that. And maybe sometimes it's lame where you're like, oh, I just heard him say that like 3 times. And like, doesn't he have anything else? In fact, that's kind of, we have a couple comedians that we've kind of stopped seeing because we've been seeing them for, in my case, 40 years. And if it's the
It's the
same
same
act,
thing. Yeah.
that when it was like, wow, you really are not only reciting, you're kind of on autopilot. And that's a weird thing to see, is to just, I don't know. I really like people that are prolific in that way. Like, boy, Jake Johansson, every time we see him, he's got a whole new act. He's really wonderfully observant and witty. And same with, I mean, we can start Dave Attell and a bunch of people that we've lost. Richard Jenny used to be so prolific and so good. And even though it was his voice saying those things, he always had cool new things to say. And John Panette, we've lost a couple, like I said, but just every time that Jake Johansson comes to town, it's like, I want to see him again. He's going to make me laugh my butt off in the same way, and it's going to be that kind of material that, like, you hope you'll remember it so you can share it with your friends, because
Right.
it's not jokey jokes. It's more like, man, he thought of something that everybody else has talked about this situation. He had this perfect, incisive, maybe mocking, maybe appreciative, whatever. It was just, I love people's minds that work that way that nobody else's does, and it's cool to get a glimpse into that. Stephen Wright, with his perfect one-liners and two-liners, and Emo Phillips, you know what I
Emo.
mean? Anybody who can be just the economy of writing a perfect, what's called a paraprosdokian. There's a geek word for you.
That'll be the
It's
word of the week.
the word of the week. It's a garden path statement. It's where you're able to set up in one sentence the expectation where somebody thinks they know what they're going to hear next, and then you take that left turn. You take them down the garden path, and then you push them into the bushes. You know what I mean? And
Right.
he's so perfect about that. That let's see, they used to call me Mr. Baseball. Because of the stitches.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? And like, oh man, and he has 1,000 of those. Oh well, oh well.
Right.
Like I said, I have my top 10. That's probably the biggest thing that I like, and maybe that's in the National Comedy Center. It's a little bit weird to see those things canned, but when some of the performances are like the first time that this guy was on Johnny Carson or this gal was on Saturday Night Live, and they bring their A game material, and the roar of the crowd when they hear something they've never heard before, like Elaine Boozler at the top of her game, was just unbelievably funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when they get the comedy, like the audience is already laughing, and they go into the next joke, and people are like gasping, give me a chance. I gotta collect myself. And I love when somebody's good at that they get on a roll, and they're I don't know. There's so many, somebody who is very dry in their delivery, and that people are like hanging on their every word. I love that, where like you're totally um, focused on what they're saying, and you're trying to get ahead of them. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's any number of times that Colleen and I like lean over to each other and think we know what the punchline is going to be, and not loud enough to spoil the show for anybody else. But it's kind of cool that, well, we have a little comedic sensibility if we can do that. If they set it up and we actually got there with them, instead of only being surprised, only being battered by
Right.
humor.
Right.
So, oh well.
It's kind of like, re-listening to the same comedy albums. You know exactly what they're going to say, and it's still funny because it has that familiarity to it now. It's the
That's true.
expectation of humor and familiarity.
Yeah, and people don't talk about this often. There's some things that they're not, if you read them, they're not as funny as the person doing it.
Right.
They have such timing and such a way of engaging you, and maybe just like, they give you that little look where they challenge you to get there in front of them, or like they give you a blank look so that you are innocently unaware of the funny thing that's going to happen. And as it, I hope you don't mind my talking about this much, because sometimes, like, the death of comedy is analyzing it. You know what I mean? To really talk about why something is
that
funny.
What happened in your comedy class?
And maybe, we went to a colloquium on humor that Mensa put on. This is probably 15 or 20 years ago. It's a long time now. But that's what kept happening. Was there were scholarly people, there were funny people, but when they talked about, well, here's the 10 different kinds of humor, and here's examples of that. And the more that it wasn't just hearing the material, but them talking about, here's why it works, how well it was written, here's the choice of vocabulary that led to it. Every little dissection of that was like, oh boy, you're like killing the guy. You're operating on him, but you're not reviving him. You're hurting it. You're hurting this beautiful thing. And so that's been my reflection for a long time, is that part of what I like about comedy is the surprise of it. And there is indeed a familiarity that comes with, like, I love, there's certain comedy movies that the scene's coming up and I actually kind of start laughing because I know I love this scene. It's so well performed and the writing is so perfect. But there's others, like I said, when you've heard somebody's material, and you can even say, not only have I heard the words before, but the exact cadence with which they say it, it's so much the same that it's like, oh, this is robotic. We saw George Carlin once, where he was amazing. He was so smart and so writerly, and his material was really good. But I think also, as he got older, there'd be where he would try out his new material in like the first half, 2/3 of the show, and lots of surprises. The first time we heard Millennial Man was so fantastic. If you've never heard this, you should go find it on YouTube, everybody. It's like, I'm an alpha male with beta blockers. He just had all these wonderful juxtapositions of stuff, and that's a lot of comedy too, is, things that don't go together, but you make them, and then you see there's a little cool friction, whatever it might be. Having said that, about 2/3 of the way, he just started to recite. He had the rest of his act that he was going to go, and instead of even like pausing and waiting for audience laughter, suddenly it was like, he's not with us anymore. He's just going to get to the end of his act and say thank you and good night. And I don't know, I felt bad for him, because there must be a certain amount of physical stamina that you have to to get out there and talk for 2 hours. You know what I mean? And as he got to be 60s and 70s, and I'm not sure when he passed, but he was older, there must be something of like, one time we had him where he actually said, I'm kind of down. I'm trying out new material because I got a special coming up, but I have flu-ish symptoms, and so I may not be able to make it through. And that is indeed what happened. About halfway through, he said, I'm killing my voice. I'm just not feeling great. I'll make it up to you. I'll come back. And indeed he did. Like a year later, another show was scheduled. This was at the Canton Palace Theater, if I remember correctly. And then he returned in triumph. We were so happy to welcome him back. And his special had once again been really good. But there's got to be something that just, as people, when you're a 25-year-old baseball player and you're the master of your game, it's not easy when you're 45 and your knees hurt.
Right.
You know what I mean? So comedians must get that too. I get
absolutely.
Any performer, you can tell when actors are, I don't know, boy, actors are a whole different thing, right? Where they play different kinds of roles based on their age, and sometimes they play against that type, where they're a little younger-ish, even though they're older. Like Anthony Hopkins has done things where he sometimes embraces fully that he's a wise elder, and sometimes he's just like surprisingly spry and goofy. Same with Patrick Stewart. And so, you know what I mean? It's kind of cool that people can put on different masks, and even like mask that's 30 years different than the reality of their life. Anyway,
especially now with the technology changing ages, like Gemini Man
absolutely.
with Will Smith at 50 and 20.
Yes, exactly. And boy, they just had a thing about this where there's aging apps now that people um, they see what they're going to look like. Bear with me because we just saw a cool special about this. There's some way of understanding investing, of thinking for the future, of just making plans, if you will, is that you often are very aware of who you are and they're your friend. You're happy with that person and you might be able to people you interact with, you know them. And then if you can more easily picture other people as they age and say, well, I want my mom to be okay. I want my dad. I want my friends. And so you can picture kind of helping them out over the course of time. But some people, and I think I'm one of them, I never have any image in my mind of anybody but me right now. I don't think of myself as being what will I look like when I'm
Right?
80. And
Yeah.
especially when I was like 20, I didn't have a picture of what would I look like when I'm maybe 40 or 60 or 80. And so it's hard then to have sympathy for and value the person that you're going to be when you're 65. When you're 25, you're not like, well, when I get to where I can't easily, climb a mountain, I should get on my mountain climbing in now. I should plan ahead so that if I can't get around as much, what do I do to make sure that my older years are in comfort? And I've had to
Oh,
very much approach that in like an intellectual way, but not in an empathetic human way. And Bruce was saying that is Colleen is great at that. She's got this great ability to like picture what people were like when they were young. There must have been
well,
a
it
very
kind of
cute
goes with their
baby,
job, doesn't it? I
and
mean,
maybe that's it. Ladies are better. I hate to make sweeping statements, but I wonder because I often more often hear that from ladies that they can extrapolate both elder and younger from an existing face. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I don't spend that much time on my face. People who spend time with makeup and
yeah.
contouring and shading, then they have an idea of what does it take to simulate older or younger, especially younger if you're trying to be active in the business world, but you don't want to look like you're getting ready to retire.
An
You know what I
ancient
mean?
hag.
Yeah. You can't go and be the sea hag exactly. So it's and I thought that was just for me a very interesting observation that whatever regard I've had for the future, in some ways I thought of myself. I use the phrase "rugby tough." You know what I mean? When I was young, I just couldn't get hurt. I could go play rugby, beat myself up, beat others up, and the next morning after a good night's sleep, I was like all ready to go again. Whereas nowadays we laugh about it. You wake up with, what's this hitch? How did I strain something while I was sleeping? What the hell's wrong with my shoulder? This
Right.
isn't right. And
Right.
so I never pictured myself as having any of that. And so I really didn't. It's not like I didn't take care of myself. I haven't been a daredevil and abused myself, but it sure has been a surprise instead of being, well, that's just
Right.
you at age 60. You know what I mean? Damn it.
I think what it really is, it's your alternate self in another universe was doing something. So it strained both your shoulders because you're
That
connected.
must be it. See, exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever that alternity, deja vu, multiverse.
Right.
Yeah, I'll go with
That's
that.
what I'll go
Yeah.
with.
It bleeds over. Exactly.
Right. So do you guys do any of the parades or anything like that?
We haven't for a while. As crowds have gotten more ornery, like
Yeah.
I used to love going to small town parades. We would seek
Yeah.
out like the Potato Fest in Minot, I think it is. There's like I really love Watermelon Fest and Strawberry Fest and Mum Fest, and that's what we would try to do for the holidays: is go there and be part of like a small town festival has extra joy to it or something like that. And unfortunately, as we got to where it started to be that it wasn't just the parade. There were too many dogs, which Colleen doesn't like, or someone would throw firecrackers into the crowd. It's like,
Yeah.
why? Why would you spoil that? And it's not like that happens all the time. But if you've had it happen to you, it's forever one of those little memories that we just kind of
Right.
talked about. That
That
like
ruins it.
that's yeah. So our image of going to a place that's going to have a crowd, it isn't good nowadays.
Yeah.
But the only way we overcome it is maybe for a concert, and that there's still a certain amount of shared politeness, but not really if everybody's holding up their cell phone to capture the concert and then you're getting their hand and their glow and whatever else it might be. So that things at times have changed, and the ways in which I most get to be like the crotchety older guy is not that they've just changed. It's not like an old man yells at cloud. It's not that there's still clouds. I still like clouds. It's where, to me, things have changed for the worse. And so when you have that, it used to be that everybody went to a concert to really see the concert. And nowadays, everybody seems to be there to talk on their phone while they're at it or to get up 10 times to
Text.
get a beer.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, can you have some respect for the artist? Can you have some respect for your fellow attendees? And just like lose yourself in the music like I like to do.
Enjoy
It's
it.
really hard to lose yourself in the music when you get 1,000 interruptions over the course of 2 hours.
I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. We went to an Indians game, and
I
they're
saw
like,
that.
"Yeah,
Cool.
people aren't here to watch the game. They're here to check in on Facebook. They're here to FaceTime people and get pictures, and then they leave. It's the experience." And
Yeah.
that's sad. And I think that actually, see, when I was growing up, the Memorial Day parade was a requirement because I was in marching band in high school and then Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So
Sure.
you had to be there type thing. And I think that was good because it's honoring those we have lost in wars to give us these freedoms to go to a comedy club or, all that.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
that was instilled upon me very big. And I made my kids go even when they weren't in scouts and things. Look, you're honoring these people. You can take 2 hours out of your life in the whole year to honor these people who gave their lives at the age of 20. So you could
That's
be
right.
25 and enjoy things. I tried to instill
Well,
that, and that was really deep with me. And it angers me when people go to these things, like we got scouts, and we're like, all right, scouts come here, and I get parents going, well, we're not coming. Well, what do you mean? Well, I'm not going to sit in that crowd, or I'm not. You're what are you teaching your kids? I mean,
yeah.
that it's not that important. That bothers me. Or worse, they grab their kid as they walk by and then leave. Well, no, you should come into the ceremony that honors. No, we don't have time for that. What, your potato salad's going to go bad before we? I mean, it's like that
Right.
always
Right.
bothered me when they would do that. Now, to be honest, we haven't gone for the past couple years, and it's no real big reason. We don't have a reason to be there. We do go maybe every other year or so. Edinburgh is rough where I live because they don't do it till 11. So by the time you're out of there, it's 1 in the afternoon. And
Right. And
that,
it's already the heat of the day and lots of parking problems. And
yeah,
okay.
and that takes, if you wanted to get together with people or go to the lake or something, your day's almost gone by the time you get there. So
Yeah.
I begin to understand that a little bit. Um, we still try and go at times. I know Deerfield, they do theirs earlier, like 8 a.m. So
Interesting.
I've gone down there because, I mean, at least I'm taking the time and I'm honoring it, and I can fit it into my schedule, which sounds like, well, but okay,
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
understand what I'm saying. um,
I maybe it's also after you've done it like 30 times, the 31st just doesn't have the must do, the appeal, the whatever else.
right.
So just that I grew up, same thing. We went to the P&E parade in Elk Grove Village. We went when I was in Champaign-Urbana. I went every single year. It was like the thing you did before going into finals in college. And I don't know, like I said, small town stuff really is more cool. But then when I came up to Chicagoland again and lived first in Elk Grove, then Hoffman Estates, I don't know, it wasn't the same and it wasn't as necessary, I guess. I
Yeah.
started using it as an excuse for like a nice 3-day weekend. And where do I want to go? Kind of get away from crowds. I would go
Right.
to Starved Rock and hike around there. And I'd go to where I thought it was the more obscure state park. So it wouldn't be everybody that comes there to have a big, like luau. You know what I mean? They build a big bonfire and all that kind of stuff. It's still, I guess some part of having time off, a vacation to me has never been go to where there are more people. It's go to where there are less. So
Right.
most of the time when we do our hiking vacations, we also do it in what they call the collar seasons. Like April, May, and September, October. The kids are back in school or still in school, and there's just family vacations are a whole different noise level and traffic level and stuff. And we kind of like the place to ourselves. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
get more
Yeah.
nature.
You can
Bears will
do
come
that.
out, horses will come out if you're the first people down that path that day, whereas they've already had, 500 people kind of trundling along and the kids jumping on everything. There's no beaver that's going to come out of his lodge into the pond for them. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So
Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot of plans. We've got our podcast Friday night. We're doing a
and
live
that's right.
podcast for Texas.
Exactly. And yeah, the Lone Star RG, they in fact, I think it's going to be a good topic too, because
Oh gosh, I can't wait.
we're talking about like working from home. And maybe that's one of those things that if we should have done this last year in prepping everybody for what it's going to be like to live through a COVID year. But it is, I don't know, I'm looking forward to sharing. Here's what you and I have discovered. If you're going to work from home, how do you make that tolerable? How do you make that efficient? How do you make that joyful? You know what I mean? And so we have different technologies and stuff like that. But I think some of the same, well, just that we'll share all of what we each have learned, and we'll see if anybody else cottons onto any of those ideas.
Right.
I think that some part of it isn't just the tech. It isn't only the geeky. It's also you learn about how you work, how your body works, how in light or in dark, and those kinds of things.
And
You know, so
it's different too because the other ones we've done have been other Ohio RGs. So
right,
the culture's similar, the weather is similar. So, anything we talk about, they kind of get. Texas is different. They have a different
right.
culture. They have a different weather system. So working at home is different there than it would be up here. So I think it'll be interesting. And if we get any questions or feedback.
Exactly. Well, now you're saying that I have to how do I change my office environment? I have like a gun rack on my back wall. I have to have oh, here's my pet
Antlers.
armadillo. Let me just pet my armadillo for a minute.
Right.
I have to and actually, there was just, I think, a Jeopardy episode or something where it was, the German word for armadillo is something like, tank pig, Panzerschwein or Panzerschwein. I think that's what it was. It was like, well, that's how Germans do it. They don't make up a new word. They take existing words and combine them. It's like, yes, that's what Tarkus, the album by ELP, is all about. It's a little armored armadillo made into a machine, a Panzerschwein. That's very cool. So,
right. So speaking music wise, you mentioned a new group you're going to go see. Is that this weekend?
So it's the end of August.
Okay.
And they're not a new group. So it's the Residents.
A new group to me.
Yes, exactly. Sorry. I got to tell you, they are an acquired taste. I really think that a lot of people who like the Residents are the same kind of people that they'll come to pretentious drinking where there's 100 nice things to taste and they'll say, give me the bitterest thing you got.
Right.
The Residents are an odd band. They play industrial trance, a little bit electronic, a little bit harsh sometimes, but still melodic. It's not just noise.
Right.
But they deal with they just do things differently than everybody else does. They have an album where it's 45 different 1-minute snippets as if they're commercial jingles, their versions of commercial jingles. They have things where here's stories from the Bible, and album by album, they'll change amazingly between what they're doing. When they perform, they've never been seen. They wear masks. Most of the time, the image you might have seen of the Residents, if ever you would want to know who the heck they are, they have big eyeballs. They're big eyeball heads, exactly, with top hats on them, because that would not be odder. And at one point, and I know a little bit about them because I've followed them for a long time. They have their own company way before everybody else was incorporating, and David Bowie became davidbowie.com and that kind of stuff. They created a thing called the Cryptic Corporation, where they controlled all of their own musical rights and the ability to perform and all that kind of stuff. And they guard their secrets zealously as to exactly who's in the band. And you never know when music is going to come out. They don't do hey, album's dropping in 3 weeks, get ready. They just have always been surprising and absolutely steering their course in the world just based on whatever logic or whim or whatever they do. But having said that, they have 50 albums out. I think everything is still available via their website. They're the biggest band that nobody's ever heard of. Radio play, nay. I don't think they've ever been on the radio, and they don't try to be. They let people discover them. So I actually, this is kind of funny. I have a good friend, Tom Cortese, who I've talked about before, that's made of music. He's an amazing musician and also happens to be a rocket scientist. You know what I mean? One of those guys that I can say,
this isn't rocket science.
This isn't rocket science, because Tom would tell you it isn't either. Exactly. So he and I, when we met in college, we met working at Bubby and Zadie's, a deli at right in Jamestown. And you know how sometimes you get to know people by the references that they drop, and it wasn't just how about those Fighting Illini and the game this weekend. It was, my God, he knows about we both like the Todd Rundgren, actually Utopia, Adventures in Utopia album. And so when you have to work together and you're going to choose what music to play over the public PA, it wasn't having to fight over he wants pop, I want prog. We had enough of the same odd but tasty musical tastes that we bonded over that. And then we found out, we found out that we both were on Play-Doh a lot. And one of the things that you could do on Play-Doh, which was the educational computer system at U of I, was that for your classes and so forth, I was Alan Baltus at MBA or whatever else it might be, and the various different classes at Math W. You also could have, for the first time in my life, a persona. Maybe BBSs, I guess I also didn't go on, but I we found out that we both frequented some of those same interesting groups, games that we played, or a comic book discussion or a music discussion they both. And when I revealed, I don't know that I meant to do it, because you kind of keep that to yourself, that I was boy with brain in a jar. And he was like, "Oh my God, that's you. I like your stuff. You definitely are. I like now it all comes together. I can see how you are that guy." And so I said, "Well, what's your handle?" And he goes, "Never mind, idiot." And I was like, "Wait, what?" Because he goes by NMI, never mind, idiot. And it was like, oh my God, it was the first time that you had that, what people call decloaking. You know what I mean? I have any number of people from BBS and other things that I've come to know for years, decades, without my really knowing who they are. And this was my first experience of that in college was that reveal, that bonding over, man, I already know you. I like your writings. You're already an interesting, and now I like, oh my God, face to face, meet space. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he used to work in the music lab, up on fifth floor of the Plato building, Cyril, the computer education research lab, and like to be allowed up there. It's like an artist's garret. Well, he was doing music, experimentation education, and I was allowed to go up there. And it was just like the coolest thing, whatever I could share with him about what I was doing to write the maze generator for this game. And this is kind of an odd thing. One of the first guys that I knew that could like keep up with me in certain things, like playing Boggle or playing math games where you have a series of numbers and operators, and you make it, that's going to total up to 17. And it's kind of funny. I am more confessional on our podcast than I ever have been in my life about like braggy type stuff. But it used to be that I was just crushingly better than everybody else. And then as you discover people, Gene Anderson is another, Tom Cortese, probably you, where they have that weird facility of playing Scrabble because they can do anagrams well, or Boggle, and doing math things where it's not first generation math and only algebraic stuff. It's like he liked fractals. Tom was into fractals when nobody else really, honestly, it was an odd, unknown new thing back then. And not only did he like fractals, but then like a year after we had met, he was going to have an art show in the Union where he was one of the first guys that took the fractal patterns, the Mandelbrot set and dragons, and colorized them so that they were beautiful, not just mathematically looking like a spirograph pattern, but a way to make it into art. And so that cool intersection of his brilliance and his artistic sensibilities, it was just, I like to try to do that. And I don't know that I can draw. I'm really not more than a stick figure type guy, but I could generate beautiful things that had the symmetry and the interest and the like unpredictability, even though it's mathematical, that I find fascinating. And he was into that too. So having said all of that, it's because we both knew about the residents that it was one of the biggest mind blows of like, I don't know anybody else that knows these people even exist. And you and your brother actually like them, know them, and like them. So that's the big way of saying when I saw the residents were touring, and they only tour like every 10 years. They often disappear for a while. And they're going to be in both Detroit and Chicago, but not in Cleveland. So I was like, all right, I got to do a road trip. I'm going to have to go this. Let's see, Detroit's 3 hours, Chicago 6, but Tom's in Champaign-Urbana, so him making it to Chicago is easier. And so I asked them if they wanted to do it, and got tickets for Lincoln Hall. It's like a general admission, smaller place in Chicago, so you know that the only people that are going to be there are not the fans. Get a beer idiots. It's going to be big fans, and it's going to be this, like, I don't even want to call it a love fest, because I don't know that anybody really loves the residents. They just respect them or something like that, Well, and it's a chance to hang with Tom, so.
Right. So I hadn't heard of them. So you introduced them to me, which I love, because anything quirky, out of the ordinary that pushes the norms, I can totally get into. I went to their website, checked out some of their videos and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, these guys are a little out there, a little different. So obviously right away it's performance art music, because the way they dress, the way they act is as much a part of the whole experience as the music itself.
Absolutely. One of the very first bands that had like things playing on a screen behind them while they played, their own created animations or their found films or whatever else it might be. And what you just said, it's 3D extravaganza. It's a
Yeah.
multimedia thing instead of just being they get out there and jam. That's exactly
Right.
right. Yeah,
And the music itself struck me as kind of a successor to some of the 60s hippie love, like you said, a love fest type things. It
exactly.
had that same feel and vibe to it. There wasn't any uh, top 40 pop hits, there wasn't any heavy metal, there wasn't
That's right.
ballads. It was very musical. It was music.
Yeah.
That's it's hard
There's
to,
music to it, there's melody, but there's also like a trance element, a space rock
yeah,
element that's repetitive, but it moves you through repetition in a way that builds to a crescendo, or that, you know what I mean? It's kind of funny. One of the difficult things is describing their music to somebody else. They're one of the bands you have to like, maybe you just got to go listen to some stuff and see if you like them. And I
right,
can try to describe why I continue to find them interesting, but they're also something, and I can do them in small doses. Do I put them on while I'm writing or while I'm doing various other things? There's a particular mindset that I want to be in. It's like I want to do
right,
something that requires more of my attention. I'm always curious as to what their latest album is. But then there's a lot of things like, I don't know, I listen to something conventional, REO Speedwagon. The first time you hear it, and you're like, I won't mind hearing four of those songs again. They were just catchy enough and et
right.
cetera, melodic enough. Whereas the Residents, I'm like, boy, I hope I can remember the titles of some of these songs, because sometimes the titles don't even go like, why is this one called, Underground Vacuum or something?
Right.
You know
You're
what I
not
mean?
getting an earwig that plays in your head all
Yes,
day long. It's like go back
exactly.
and listen to Pipers at the Gates of Dawn or something like that, where you're
A
like,
great
what
way to
the
put it.
hell is this? Yeah.
Early psychedelia, early space rock. That's exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
it's definitely not something you would recommend to everybody. I mean, I could name a dozen people I wouldn't even tell about because they wouldn't get it. They think they'd like, you're weird.
exactly, that honestly, that is like when people go to listen as you did. Part of the risk of you talking about this, people are going to go, "You really like this?" You know
Right.
what I mean? It's like there's something wrong with you
It's
over.
almost like you need the passcode to get through the club door.
Yeah, yeah, and yet there's any number of things that like I kind of want that to exist. I want
Oh
to
yeah.
sponsor. I want to encourage people to not just be 4/4 blues based rock or pop or whatever else it might be. I like people that put things out there and just say it's something we like doing.
You,
And you know what I mean. If we
you
make the
know what?
connection, good. If we don't, that's
It
okay
wouldn't
too.
surprise me if, like in the '70s or even '80s,
Hmm.
whenever they got together, that they were a bunch of friends in college and they did this as a performance troupe at college, and they said, we have a lot of fun doing this. Let's see what happens, and
And it
it would
just kept
not.
going.
Yeah.
That's
It,
honestly that's a very good analogy. They're out of San Francisco, and so it really is
uh,
possible. San Francisco has any number of arts colleges,
yeah.
so maybe they went to San Francisco School of the Arts, and they just said, we can continue to do this, and especially with nobody knowing who we are, we can do our day jobs and not have to be a fully committed rock and roll world. The
Right.
fact that they can go on tour for a couple months means they have to have some ability to like take a break from being a professor, being a roofer, being
Right.
whatever else it is. That you know what I mean. This it's I'm just always so curious about them that I want to see what they have going on.
the
You
the
know what I
world
mean?
doesn't necessarily need a dozen bands and artists like this, but the world needs some artists like this.
That's what I think. And you know what? I think there's a whole big difference to me also with they're not trying to be ugly or off-putting. There's any number of like thrash metal, death metal,
Right.
certain things that like
Shock value.
you're getting growled at. And it really is meant to be not just discordant, but actively just nasty, screechy, unlistenable, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think it's that fighting the beauty and ugliness. I don't think that's what they're shooting for. And they're not trying to be assaultive and get everybody like pogoing and inflamed and let's go get in a fight. You know what? This is what a great
Right.
music. I feel like I want to kill someone. They just seem to be quirky and
Yeah.
odd and not ugly. You know what I mean? It's but they don't shy away from not everything they do. Like if you watch the video, they were one of the first ones to do videos and post them. So they have a thing like the Gingerbread Man was actually one of the first CDs that was the combination of music and animation and stuff like that. So they were you knew that they had to be computer-ish enough to have done their music as well as these things. And so if you're looking for like it wasn't MTV, it wasn't just a band playing and looking pretty like In Excess, but they definitely expanded the field in terms of this is how you can do that integration of animation and music and have it be that it's very much your own thing. Nobody else can do this but you.
Right.
So anyway, so that's my plans for August, and it really is the first thing that we already have tickets for James Taylor at Blossom, and that's going to be the first concert that we go to where it's like, we know we're vaccinated, but it's going to be a crowd scene. It's going to be, I don't know how much social distancing you can get on the lawn, et cetera, et cetera. But then, of course, the amazing contrast. Yeah, James Taylor, and then a month later, I'm seeing the Residents.
Yeah.
So that really is the depth and breadth of my oddness, I guess. You know what I mean?
Well,
Boondinia.
we could go to Lollapalooza and do all that craziness, and that would really top it off right there.
Yep. When I've been to festivals like that, like Milwaukee Summerfest, or I often was at the second stages instead of the main stage,
right?
Because I usually liked cool, odd, quirky Weird Al Yankovic more than I liked. Yeah, exactly. Or especially, I hear Van Halen on the radio all the time,
right.
Whereas there's no guarantee that I'm going to hear, I don't know, Popol Vuh or something like that. I was always amazed at some of the choices that bookers would have of like, wow, you really are spanning the breadth of what's available today, because you're risking that people are going to hear some of this music, they're going to flee, and there's going to be a huge crowd over here and like crickets over here, because some of the music was very, I don't know, not unlistenable, but it sure is a particular taste for some prog, trance, whatever things I might like.
A couple years ago, I took Megan to see one of her favorite bands at the time, which was, as they call it, a screamo band. It was just metal, but the kids call it screamo now. But there were 3 bands that played, and the very first band was the ones I liked the best. It was heavy. They weren't quite the screamo, but they were, a little heavier than a lot of stuff. And out of the whole night, I was like, that very first band, who's, low man on the totem pole, I like them the best, and they're still around. They're on Spotify. I listen to them.
Okay.
So, same thing.
Yes.
The rest of the stuff, I'm like, okay, how much longer? Yay, this is great. I love it.
Exactly. I love you, daughter. I'm happy to be here with you. Exactly. I've had a couple odd experiences where I really like an album for a band called Prick, where it had great dynamics. It was aggressive, but it actually had some nice lulls, and it just kind of like told a story and had good dynamics. Went to see them in concert, and they just threw out all the lulls, threw out all the softer parts, and were just constant, aggressive, yelling at you. Everything turned up to 11, and playing the guitar with like, I'm going to run a beater from a mixer on here. It's like, man, I had brought Colleen with me, saying, these guys are very interesting, and even if you've never heard from them before, I think that you'll like some of the stuff. And then, honestly, we ended up leaving because she was really like, I can't stick my whole elbow in my ear to block out enough of this music. Can we leave? Right. And I just was kind of apologetic over, I really liked their album, but I guess that's what I'm going to have. I'm never going to see them live again because they don't have any nuance live. They just kind of come out and jump you.
Well,
and, wow.
two of my favorite bands from back in the day, Def Leppard and Poison, are touring with Motley Crue, and
that's a great triple threat right there.
It's
interesting,
bunch of big names. But I went and saw Motley Crue several years ago with some friends, and it was one of the worst concerts I have ever been to. We were at Blossom. We were in the pavilion, so we thought this will be great. They were so unmixed. It was just a wall of noise, and it was all jumbled together. You couldn't hear the drums from the guitar, from the vocals. In fact, at one point, my friend leans over and goes, "What song are they on? I can't hear a single vocal. Honestly, it's just mud."
They never did a sound check, or they just didn't care?
Well,
you know what? Oh, man.
Somebody said, well, Vince Neil's voice is going, so they just turn everything up to cover up that he can't sing anymore. I'm like, what's the point? I wasted my money. It was, I like Motley Crue. I'm a hair metal guy. I like the pop stuff, but it was just, I want to have a good concert experience, and it was horrible. I mean, the best part of the night was I got a Fat Tire beer. I mean, it was $16 for a can, which was horrible.
That's right.
The music was not the best part of the night. So
yeah. That inevitably we're going to have those disappointments. Sometimes I see people and they're just what I wanted them to be, and I'm just glowing after the show. And once in a while, like, I really like Styx. You know what I mean? They're especially like Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight. They got like 4 albums in a row where they really were at the height of their prog pop essence. But I went to see them, and they did like an hour and 10-minute show. They just decided to play a couple hits and be done. And it's like, man, and it wasn't even their hits are not their best material to me. So sometimes when you go to something in live, you're hoping for a deeper cut or for them to stretch out on something. Well, they forever, I probably would see them again because that didn't totally turn me off to them. But it was like, what was going on with you guys? Like was it already band problems? I know they went through some difficult stuff with Dennis DeYoung and et cetera. But it was just like, that's the least amount of music per dollar that I've gotten in any concert I've ever been to. I was really pissed,
It's like
and as you might imagine, they weren't cheap tickets. It was like they were, because they were so popular. Oh well,
it's like going to see a movie now that's less than 90 minutes. It's like, what the heck was that?
and it's because we always jump around. I just heard that they're remaking Highlander with apparently Henry Cavill in the role.
Yes.
See, I'm not. The first Highlander is a perfect movie.
But here's a disagreement.
Perfect.
I love the Highlander stuff. I've seen the movies. I watched the series. But I always thought the first movie just wasn't quite as much as it could have been. It was missing something. It felt incomplete to me, even back in the 80s. I liked it, and I'm like, okay, but it just, I don't know, there's something that didn't engage me as much as some of the other stuff did. And I have been actually recently, I watched those again, and I'm like, man, I really hope somebody makes this movie, like remakes it really, really well, can really pile it on with some of the new stuff and stuff. I don't know. The story itself just seemed a little weak to me, even back then.
I really love the first movie, and I know that it has some elements that are not perfect, but like, how are you going to find a villain as good as Clancy Brown as the Kurgan?
He was
a
fantastic.
Performance for the ages. And they tried, like Michael Ironside in one of the sequels and stuff like that, tried to find other villains that were anywhere near as menacing, as crazy, as formidable as he was, and they couldn't do it.
And maybe that was part of it.
Oh my God.
Maybe I think, analyzing it a bit now, that was maybe part of it. Maybe when I was younger, I felt this, but I can analyze it better now. He was fantastic. He was a great villain. But what did we ever really feel about him or get to know him? I mean, he showed up in a couple scenes as a crazy maniac, and then he got his head cut off. There wasn't enough character and build-up, I don't think.
See, I thought that I don't know. I guess I didn't need that much character to see that he was like the strongest, the one determined to win the tournament. And like, there's scenes where he did how blasphemous he was, how he was willing to do anything. You know what I mean? That's like, I just, oh, I see. He was not Ramirez's woman. She was your woman. And she never, I love doing the Kargan voice. It's like, and secretly she yearned for my return. It's like, oh my God, that's just so hideously inflammatory and perfect. Happy Halloween, ladies. Oh my God.
And it does have a wonderful soundtrack. There's no denying that.
That's true. Queen, exactly that. When Queen did that and Flash Gordon, it was like, wow, was that one of the first big bands to actually do like not their own music, like Help or Sgt. Pepper's, but they actually did soundtracks, and that it wasn't just phoned in. The music was really good.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
okay, I may have said this
forever.
I may have said this before, but unfortunately, I can't stand the Flash Gordon theme from Queen, and it's not that. Okay, but that part doesn't bother me. I like the operatic, pulpy feel. That's exactly what it should have been. The only part of that song that it makes me that I can't listen to it is when they get Dale going, Flash, Flash, I love you, but we only have 14 hours to save the Earth. I'm like, that is the worst written line ever in Hollywood. That is horrible.
I agree.
And
there's no comparison.
The
Between the movies, there's no comparison. Between the soundtracks, absolutely Highlander so much better than Flash Gordon. I agree. You know what I mean? So
here's the thing. With the way expectations are with movies, with what they put into movies, and they're willing to spend a little more time. I think they could have made that first Highlander movie better if it had just 10, 15 more minutes, a little more with the characters. And I think it just...
And maybe that's what they'll add is the backstory or something like that. Okay.
Just think if they did this new one the way they do some of the Marvel movies, that over the top big, that you really want to cheer at the end of it. I think that's
really
what Highlander needs.
Yeah. I'll tell
So,
you, like that last sword fight at the end of the first Highlander is as good as anything I've ever
oh
seen.
yeah,
The camera moves, the swooping in. They're in this big, warehouse of a place with lighting that makes it harder to do the fight. And there's water dripping, and it just was apocalyptic in what was
yeah,
going on. And I don't know, I just and even some of their previous fights where they had been like skirmishes compared to this final one, they were just so dangerous, so much like, wow, people really are losing their head here.
6 foot
You
swords.
hope, yeah, it just, I thought I love movies that have great atmosphere. You know what I mean? Like they used New York in a way that it wasn't like
Yeah,
brightly lit. It was very gothic, like one of the Batman movies. It was very dangerous to have in the middle of the city. There still are dark alleys, and there's sputtering lighting, and
right.
there's things like this, that there's sewers and drippy places and stuff like that. And I I it's kind of funny. I like movies that are quotable, and I still have lines that I say like from Highlander till today. You know what I mean? There's
Right.
that, and everybody says there can be only one, and maybe they don't even know where it came from. But
Probably
you
not.
know, one of my regrets, unfortunately, is I've never had children, and I wish to God I had met. I'm going to tear up.
Oh
If I had
no.
met Colleen early enough so we could have had kids, because they would have been strong and fine. That's a line from the movie, and
Oh
just
yeah.
ah.
Well,
So
but maybe your alternate universe Al did. So
I
think of it
hope
that
so.
way.
Exactly that. I can see alternate me dandling, their sons and daughters on their knee, and just, guess that. Taking them for the hikes and taking them to the zoo, and they'll know every animal. They can name every dinosaur, and they'll be like,
Right.
the first time they beat me at chess, it'll be like, wow, how cool is this? That my
Right.
kid is this good.
My Colin used to beat me at some of the card games, even when I was actually trying. I'm like, this is stupid.
Yes.
So okay, so maybe this is it. So this leads into something else I want to talk about. So thinking about the Highlander movie, the one scene where he's fighting that guy in the alley, and then the crazy Marine shows up with the gun and shoots him, and then he steals the car and takes the grandma for a ride, and she's screaming, and suddenly she ends up on the hood. I'm like, wait a second.
I know, a
How the
little
hell
bit
did
of
she end up on the hood? Second of all, why is that scene like 45 minutes long or something? I mean, it just goes on forever. And I think it slows the movie down. But bringing
okay.
that Marine into it, that was a mistake because he just suddenly showed up and he has a gun, and we're supposed to go, oh man, crazy Marine. That, that, that's an example of how to improve it is you need that character earlier in the show. So you have some, oh, he's going to have a conflict. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Okay.
And
See,
I'm
I could
saying,
swear there was some foreshadowing that they showed the city was under siege, and that there were people that were determined to not be the one that gets killed by the guy. The cops were really perfect as these like kind of like world weary cops, and so
yeah,
they're trying to figure out what's going on. And like in this world of machine guns, back then there weren't really any, and guns and stuff like that, someone gets killed with a sword and they're like, what the hell is going
right.
on here? you
Yeah,
know
yeah,
there's there's a great scene with like one of the like a maybe a hobo, a bum on the street, or maybe it's a the guy who runs the newsstand. He's like reading the newspaper about how the cops are making no headway, and he's like, what do incompetent mean?
right.
What do
Yeah,
baffled
and he's
mean?
laughing.
And it's
He's
like,
laughing.
yeah, that movies that do that, that find a way in the middle of all this tension building and adventure and danger, they have those laughs. They have that ability to break so that you get to breathe a little bit and
Yeah,
step back, and then so that it's more of a roller coaster ride instead of this clenching perpetual nothing but danger. That was one of the first movies I remember being that, and Silver Streak were both really good at, wow, there's really danger going on, but there's really good laughs here as well. So I don't
yeah,
know. I hope that they don't, like, maybe if they make a better story out of it, I hope that they don't lose all those little
exactly.
character interactions and you know and quirky things about it. I
They
it's
can
cool.
make, I mean, the mythology itself had a few problems and holes in it, especially when
Right.
they went to the second movie. It's like, wait a second, you guys
See,
just really screwed this up.
I
Uh,
think that's how we've talked about this before, is that when I went to see the sequel, and I was just because I loved the first one so much,
yeah,
and I just invited all my friends, we're going to go see this great thing. And I remember we're sitting there in a restaurant after the movie, and we're all just like staring at the table. And then we look up and go, oh, how could it
yeah,
be so bad? And we were like
yeah.
crying. We were angry crying over, how did they fuck it up so much?
The
Oh
the
my God.
the director's cut didn't help a whole lot.
Right. They even
It
tried fixing it. It was like, no, you missed what made it
yes,
ridiculous instead of
exactly.
cool. You know
Yes,
what I
and they can do a new movie. I mean, I don't know if they're planning on doing it in the same universe and just expanding it or just a reboot. It's tough because there's been so much changed with the mythology through the TV show and then the two final movies that were made for TV movies
right, with
that
Adrian Paul and Christopher Lambert.
yeah,
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
source and whatever else and it
Right.
really like went off the rails.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the
but
second one just decided to go science fiction instead of like
yeah,
medieval fantasy. It was like, why you had a good mythology going? Why throw it
well,
out?
you
Oh
got
well,
guys on gliders that look like He-Man. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Oh, now I have a round skateboard. Oh yeah, this is just so. Oh well. Oh
yeah,
well.
but so anyway, with all my writing recently, I've
Yes.
discovered we talk about movies and analyzing them and what makes them good and all that.
Right.
There's a book and there's a what they call the beat sheet. The book is called Save the Cat, and it was originally written for screenwriters, but somebody has done it for novelists and for books. And basically, what it does is it takes every big famous book or movie, the story, and breaks it down into these beats
The
that
story
at
arc, the
yeah.
beats.
And
Exactly.
at this
Yes.
point, your hero's this, and you do this before that. And at this point, you have this in it. And what they basically are saying is following these beats doesn't limit you, but it gives everybody what they anticipate for a story, what they have internally for stories, and it hits all those points at the right time in the right
There you
way.
go.
And it's a way of analyzing your story. But once you learn it, you can get so creative. It almost frees you up by having that structure. And they analyze so many movies with
Very cool.
this, that, and the other thing, and books too, because it's for
Hmm.
novelists. But some of the things I'm reading when I think of Highlander, I'm like, yeah, they didn't do it here. They did not do this part, or and I can see where for me, I thought the movie was a little weak even when I was 20 years old, and without
Okay.
knowing all of this. So that's just something. I mean, I don't know if you'd ever want to read the book. It's 350 pages, but it's called Save the Cat. And you'd probably find a lot of things in. It's like, oh, now I understand why that works and why this is so good for this movie or whatever.
Yeah. And actually, it's got. And I've not read that book, but I've heard these things discussed honestly for a long time. I've often read Comic Buyer's Guide, and I've read various different things by comic book writers, and absolutely that's been the parlance, the way that people talk about a series in comic books is the story arc that's going to happen, the character transformation, the beats, and that you try to make sure that every single issue has this many of this kind, and it's an amplification, or it's a plot twist, or it's this is a quiet moment, this is a battle moment, and that it doesn't, as you said, it's not a straitjacket, it's not formulaic, but it gives you the ability to say, we know this works for
Right.
people, that they want to have things come to like little climaxes and then back off and move on to the next thing. And it's a way of pacing. I mean, maybe that's a gentler term. There's always been pacing in things where you just can't, you have a train going 90 miles an hour. You have to have little stops and refreshments and things like
Right.
that. And so, a couple, like when you a couple of comic book writers that I really like Brian Michael Bendis or Mark Millar or something, when they talk about that, that's kind of the craft of how they do things. Like, and that makes sense. That's why I like them, because their sensibility for how to pace something, how to um, make sure that there's always something interesting going on, but they plant a seed of mystery back here, and then they work on it, but only a little bit. That they actually are very meta conscious of what they're doing while they're doing it, and that it makes it a very satisfying read or movie in the ways that you're talking about. So
Yeah.
it's very cool. I know that you're working on the craft of your writing, and honestly, I'm glad you found a book like that, because that sounds exactly like what other people whose work I really like and
Enjoy.
admire and
Yeah.
enjoy that it's leading you down all the good paths. So what
Yes.
Save the Cat? I would
Well,
like to read, because I like knowing about those kinds of things. I like
that's what
knowing
I
the internal
figured.
workings of things, So
Right.
very cool.
It's one
All
of
right.
those things that even if you're not a novelist or a
Yeah.
screenwriter, that the nerd brain will probably enjoy it because it's all about analyzing. It's not the creative. It's not even the prose and the grammar. It's the analysis of the story itself, and
That's right.
the rest of the stuff you fit into there. And even like a Highlander, the first part at Star Wars is always the big example, by the way, that
Okay.
follows this. But in Highlander, the first thing they do is they show him at a game, like or the wrestling match, and
Right.
then there's the battle. So the game is the normal world that he's in, but so is the battle. That's his normal world
Right.
underneath the
And it's
normality.
the underneath. It is indeed exactly that, both
Yes,
literal and figuratively.
exactly.
Exactly. And I've
And
always
then
loved that opening scene where you start off like looking down at the huge stadium, and then the camera does this big, wonderful
around and
spiral
it
swoop, and right
focuses,
onto his face. It's like, out of all these 10,000 people, this is the guy you're going to pay attention
and he's
to.
not watching the game
Yes, he's
because
aware of,
he
his senses are picking up on the quickening. That's
yeah,
exactly right.
yeah,
In fact, that's another. Tell me how many things you now see in the world that are called the blanketing. It's a spring, so we're get the pollinating, and it's the that from the quickening is where all those things came from. It changed the vocabulary of the world by having that cool term come to exist. I love movies like that they have
yeah.
this incredible impact,
Yeah, oh
So
yeah, it's had a huge impact on our culture, and it's
yeah, yeah.
even with the horrible second movie, and that made me think of something a while back. And man, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but in the prequel movies of Star Wars, where Obi-Wan fights Grievous, he jumps off that lizard creature and lands in the middle of all those droids and stuff, and he goes,
Yes.
"Hello there." And it's a meme, and my kids quote it, and it's just that I'll hear my kids go, "Hello there,"
Hello
and
there.
yeah,
Exactly.
but that's also the very first thing Alec Guinness said in the first movie.
And
I
so they
went,
have their own continuity in the movies.
yes.
That's
I
very
went, oh
cool.
my
Yes.
God, that's so brilliant. And I never picked up on that until a couple years ago, actually. But I'm
That's
like, that's perfect. It connects the characters, you know?
absolutely. Yeah. I love that when you see that in the course of, like, I don't know, a whole bunch of stuff here. People are aware that they're trying to create memes nowadays. Not
Yeah.
only, of course, in the combination of photo plus text, but even just when they've always had, what's the characteristic line of a character on Saturday Night Live? They were always looking for that. Bear with me. Not. You know what I mean? They were very good at the early embrace of, if we can get a phrase that becomes part of the vocabulary of America, we've won, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so you'll see, like, it's kind of funny that when you see shows about writer rooms, like Gary Shandling show or 30 Rock or something like that, they will talk in this same way of, so what's the beat of this story? What's the meme? What's the line that we
Right.
want to have this guy? We have to have some kind where you're like, uh, what's the line with Willis? That's
What you talking about, Willis?
what you
What you
talking
talking
about,
about?
Willis, and like
Yeah.
the whole almost the episode leads up to that. Now that I've been watching, thank you again, Big Bang Theory, there are certain things that you're waiting for certain characters to
Yeah.
say, or at least say
Bazinga.
something like it, Bazinga, and at first sometimes it isn't that they meant that to happen, that they just threw it out there, and like there was such a response to it. It's like, who knew Bazinga would somehow,
Right.
like, don't have a cowman from The Simpsons or something like that. I don't think that they
Like,
crafted that to be
they
the
killed
perfect
Kenny.
line. They killed Kenny, exactly. And you knew there was going to be repetition of that, but you didn't know it would catch on as much as they did.
Right.
So it's very cool for what we just said about, I really don't like comics necessarily that have repetition in their acts. It's okay when they're good at that, they have a certain line that they use more than once in their act because it's a great capper. It's a great, like, that's the nail they drive in to make this joke memorable or something like that.
Yeah.
So the people are branding, they're making themselves memorable. They want a line to be associated with. So when you think of, I don't know, back in the day of Bill Cosby, for instance, when he was allowed to be listened to, he had "Why is there era Noah?" Right, and so and any number
Ding.
of things, yeah, where people, like, when a star is walking down the street and they have people yelling their favorite line at them, that's triumph. They know that penetrated so much.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
There's a guy on YouTube that I've seen a little bit. Gina watches. He just drives around the streets and he'll yell out the window a song lyric to people and record to see if they yell the next line
The
back.
next line. That's very cool. Yeah. Exactly.
And I'm glad, before we go, I'm glad you mentioned Big Bang because I've got a revelation I want to talk to you about. We'll do it next week. It can wait. Okay. About Big Bang and what it is and why it was popular. I had a revelation about that and a comparison against something else. So
very cool.
I think it'll be an interesting discussion.
The sneak preview, the foreshadowing. See, you're so writerly. It's so beautiful.
I got to remember that for next week because we've done that. I'm going to talk about this next week.
Right.
5
and
weeks
then there's
later.
the ever-growing scroll.
Yeah. I do want to talk about that because I got a really good thing for that. So
very good. So we'll see you on Friday night, and then we'll see. Depending on what happens over the weekend, maybe we'll take Tuesday off. Maybe not. We've been on a roll.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
So we'll see. Okay. As always, a pleasure. Have a great weekend. And it's supposed to be hot today, so hide in the cool. All right.
Well, I'm going to make the kid go mow.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right, man. You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery Podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Steven's conversation on geek topics of